Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Thank you for stopping by again. Today I'd like to talk a little bit about the Panama Canal, something that you're aware of, I know, but perhaps not in as much detail as is necessary to understand its role. I'm not going to give you all that detail here, but I'm going to give you enough to give you an idea of how it operates, because it's quite different than it's made out to be by some of the websites whose primary purpose is to tell you what you want to hear so that you send them money, as opposed to actually doing any research or analysis of their own. They just don't. I mean, some of the stuff they put out is just appalling, but it's being used to satisfy their readers, bring them back in for the advertisers' sake, and also to sell all these various and sundry booklets and whatever, seminars and so forth. I have no objection to people in business, but the distortion of the canal and how it operates here is one of the more annoying little things. It's insignificant, and we all know that, but, and it used to really aggravate people, but now it's just like rolls off the back and just let people believe whatever they want to. But you need to understand that the Panama Canal is a very special institution, and it may not have another quite like it in your own society. But the canal, it has its own sections of the national constitution. It's very separate. It has what's called its own organic law. Let me describe basically the fundamentals here, or what they say about themselves and how it's set up under the Constitution. It is exclusive charge of the operation, administration, management, preservation, maintenance, and modernization of the canal, as well as its activities and related services within, of course, the convention, within the Constitution and its regulations. And it's expected to operate in a safe, continuous, efficient, and profitable manner. Okay, but the point is that every exclusive charge of the operation, administration, and so forth. It also is covered by organic law. It has its own patrimony and the right to administer it. This may mean nothing to you. Hang in there. And the members, the Panama Canal constitutes an inalienable patrimony of the Republic of Panama. Therefore, it may not be sold, assigned, mortgaged, or otherwise encumbered or transferred. I could go into the detail of what organic law means. It's a pretty important term. And what patrimony means, it's a pretty important term, too. But basically, what it boils down to is the Panama Canal is set up under the Constitution to be an autonomous agency to the extent it conceivably can be and still be a government agency. It is a government agency. It always will be. It will always be responsible to the government at the top. But it has been segregated out in the Constitution. It's in charge of its own money. It's in charge of its own credit rating. It's in charge of what it borrows and what it does with the money that it borrows and everything else. And each year, when it completes its fiscal year, it will have paid its bills. It will have set aside money for whatever's coming down the road. And then the remainder is provided to the government for its use. This is something that is, it sounds like they negotiated. Actually, it boils down to, as the canal says, this is how much we have. And maybe the government says, can you squeeze a little more out, or something. But they have it down pretty much pat. And it's pretty well automatic. Now, the canal is extremely profitable. It runs very well. We had, the last full year, we had $3.1 billion of income through it, but $1.6 billion, that's just over half of it, was, you might call it profit. It was the additional turned over to the government for the support of government programs. That's an extraordinarily profitably run and extremely well-run agency. It's received all sorts of awards for the way in which it is operated. It is has the great absolute confidence of the Panamanian people, and it is left alone. And any politician who goes in there and tries to change this, tries to change the Constitution, the organic law, the idea of patrimony, all these wonderful terms here, which guarantee a great deal of independence for the canal. Anyone who tried to do that would be out in his butt very quickly. It just is not going to be allowed. So politicians are kept as far away as possible from the actual management of the canal itself. That's incredibly important. And because it is, as they say, patrimony, it can't be sold. It can't be handed over to anybody. It simply cannot. You'd have to change the Constitution. You'd have to change a lot of things. And above all, you'd have to do it over the extreme objections for the Panamanian people. The last thing in the world they want is to have the Canal Authority run by politicians. There are always a few in there who would like to take some of the money or tell them they have to. They want 10% of it set aside for some special interest. And we just slap it down. Every time that comes up, they're reminded that, no, this is not the way it operates. The Canal Authority does not do that. It provides a lump sum to the government. The government can then decide how to expend it, but they are not going to be required to give it in sections, a certain amount for this, a certain amount for that. Otherwise, we'd have people lined up and around the corner wanting their 5 or 10% until we had enough to cover 450% of the money. So it doesn't work that way. It works as it does very, very well. And it's very successfully. Now, people will often say to me, I say, well, Panama is, a stable and a very successful economy. And they'll say, well, it has the canal, as if that explains everything. Actually, it helps, but it doesn't. That's always been true. We've always had the canal, so to speak, although not the income from it entirely. Very little of it came in rent from the U.S., so very, very, very little. So as a result, it was still there. It still generated additional secondary benefits and so on. The truth of the matter is that Panama's dramatic economic growth has occurred after the beginning of this 21st century. It started out on a recession in 2000, 2001, 2, and then it started to its climb, which has been extremely dramatic since then, and which has led it right past every other Latin American country. And there are only two of us left at the top of the mountain, so to speak, right now. It's Chile and Panama, and we like Chileans. They're our friends, but we're not in competition with them. But it has been a dramatic growth, and I've shown that in some of the videos I've had earlier, and I will in the upcoming report from Panama that will be out, hopefully, aimed for by the end of the month. And again, if you're interested in getting that, it's going to be quite a lengthy document. It's going to cover a lot of area. Just go to retirementwave.com and sign up if you haven't already, subscribe to that newsletter. It's very easy to unsubscribe. There's no advertising. I don't try to sell you anything or whatever. But people who are on that list get a link to a PDF version of that report when it's ready. And I haven't done one in about a year and a half, so this is one is well looked forward to by a number of people. I've certainly been hearing from them recently since I made that announcement. So if you haven't subscribed, you'd like to get it, go in and do that, and you can always take yourself off the list immediately afterwards if you want to. Well, you probably noticed that the lighting is a little different. I had to take a break yesterday, which is an appropriate time. I finished talking about the canal's operation because I had a guest for the evening, and now I'm back the next day, and I'm going to try to get this thing done and on its way. But I didn't want to drop the topic without at least talking about another favorite indoor sport here among some people, which is trying to come up with whatever the next threat is to the Panama Canal and why everyone should worry about it, that sort of thing. That's been going on for ages. It's just part of the background noise. But it gets noticed primarily by people outside the country at websites here and there coming down. And so to us is not even worth talking about it seems to be a major issue for many people who come down. So the question is there competition out there that the Panama Canal has to worry about? And I'll suggest to you that no, there isn't any many people are thinking of, at least. The Nicaragua Canal, forget it. There's not any Nicaragua Canal. Nothing's been done in that order. Nothing is expected to be done. It didn't make any sense when the first plans came out. It was very clear that the government, People's Republic of China, wasn't particularly excited about it. They did nothing about it. They ignored it completely, and they don't do that in their projects here in Latin America. It was just one guy, really, who ended up losing a whole pile of money in the stock market, and, well, things just sort of fell apart. That never made any sense for a whole host of reasons that are just boring to get into. Way too much time would have to be put into it, way too much money, tens of billions of dollars, all sorts of environmental problems. The indigenous people of Nicaragua, through the ceiling, and that things are, it's their land, much of it is being used. Farmers whose land was going to be taken from them for use in the canal were being offered very little money for them. That's a great way to start trouble. And Nicaragua, right at the moment, has proven it's quite capable of getting itself in trouble. The environmentalists had pointed out you're going to take the major source of potable water in the country and you're going to put it at risk by shipping, and so on. So much was lined up against it that it was really hard for anybody to take it seriously after one sat down and took a look at the actual facts. Since then, it's just died out. So we've had other things like that. Believe it or not, Costa Rica at one point talked about it, but that's sort of gone. Guatemala, well, it wasn't going anywhere. A few years ago, there was quite a stir here because Colombia talked about creating a dry canal across Colombia. And a dry canal meant that the ships came in at, say, the Pacific side of Colombia. All the containers would be unloaded there. They'd be put onto railroad cars. They'd be taken across Colombia to the Atlantic coast. They'd be reloaded onto ships and go on from there. Now, we're talking about something that can be done in a ship with going through the canal in a matter of hours. This is something a little bit more involved. And we just had our largest container ship just went through the canal here, a week ago maybe. It had 15,313 20-foot containers. 15,000. The ship was almost a quarter of a mile long. Now, if you think of it for a moment, what you'd have to have in the way of rail infrastructure to unload 15,000 containers. This is just one ship, and we put through over 14,000 a year. So that one ship and unload 15,000 plus containers onto a railroad car, I mean, there's no such, obviously be many trips before it could get it all over to the other side and then reload it onto a ship. The whole thing was just absurd and was immediately discounted, and for good reason. It died an almost instant death. And even building something through cartel territory and what have you was not a bright idea, but it's not the point. The point is just ridiculously expensive and not likely to happen at all. So we also had, from time to time, continue to have people concerned about the Northwest Passage, as they put it. That is the shipping through between Russia and the U.S. and up across the Arctic Ocean north of Canada and around and down, primarily probably to Europe, actually, given a polar route. But whatever, all of this is possible someday. But there's a lot of melting that still has to go on up there, a lot of icebergs taken care of. More importantly, there are a lot of agreements that these competing states need to come to oversee this, and Canada is going to play a big role in this. It's nothing that's leading us to lose any sleep over. It's there, but it's probably going to be years before it can actually be done, and insurance companies will accept the risks involved and not charge an arm and a leg, and so on and so on and so on. There's a lot of factors involved in pricing one of these things. So that no one's particularly interested in that at the moment. No real action in that direction. So what's left? And if you're going to be in analyzing something like this, the very first thing you do when you're analyzing competition is to say, what is the current competition? Because if the canal doesn't have any competition, then it basically can charge pretty much anything it wants to, and it doesn't have to be terribly concerned about its clientele. But that's not true. We definitely do have competition all the time, every single day of the year. What about them? And people don't even think about them. Basically, the Panama Canal's purpose, the bulk of its trade, is from Asia through and then around up to the Gulf Coast. of the United States, and then the eastern seaboard of the U.S., and then through the St. Lawrence Seaway to ports in Canada. So the eastern section of U.S. and Canada and the Gulf Coast, these are the areas. And in turn, ships returning the opposite direction are doing the same thing, carrying to Asia any number of things from the U.S. and from Canada. Now, we're beginning to open up other markets. One important one is northeastern Brazil. They are improving their infrastructure up there, so their port infrastructure and rail infrastructure. They grow a lot of soybeans, and given the trade war between China and the U.S., Brazil is going to benefit conceivably by soybean sales. They're going to be selling them anyhow to Asia, but perhaps even more than they normally would. So they've already been up to talk to us because they're at the stage now, they're approaching the stage at any time when they can start to move by ship from that location in northeastern Brazil, and the fastest way definitely is through the canal, not all the way around the tip of South America. So that business shows some signs of growing. And that's a good, but that's where the bulk of the business is, though, is the eastern half of the United States of America. That's the bulk of the business. Now, the competition are ships that go to the West Coast, San Diego on up to Vancouver, all up and down the Pacific coast of the U.S. and Canada. They unload their goods. Some are put onto trucks to be sent out to the eastern half of the U.S., others on rail cars, sent maybe to St. Louis or halfway across and then broken out and into trucks and then sent on and so forth. But trucking, long-distance trucking, is a primary part of their competition to the canal. And it's expensive. And it's just not getting any cheaper. They have a strike sometimes at the longshoremen in California, and it's like Christmas down here, because basically when that happens, everything comes through the canal because they don't want to sit up there. But this is where the competition lies. And if we had some reason, we had a terrible drought, we had once, we had to really reduce the number of ships going through the canal. In fact, we actually had to close it down for a few days because the water levels got low. This is some years ago. It was a very rare incident. Any event, when those sorts of things happen, then there's a competitive advantage for one side or the other. But down the road, we know autonomous trucking is coming along. It's not exactly a secret. And when the time comes, and we're not there yet, but they're certainly working their way toward it, that trucks can pick up goods in the ports in the West Coast, and then operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, move them at much less cost, much less, probably a good deal. Once it's set up and it's operating, it would be very little in insurance cost, obviously a great reduction in terms of drivers, and a variety of other things. I mean, it's going to save a lot of money once it gets set up, established, and is working. So that will have an impact on the competitive picture for the canal. And the canal is not ignorant of all this. They're quite aware of it. We're extremely profitable as it is now. Maybe we'll be profitable, but not quite so much in the future if we have this sort of challenge. Who knows? But we're aware of it. That's what you look for. You don't look for somebody to build another canal. That's just, we're probably at a point in human history when we're not going to be building any major, huge, gigantic canals like the Panama Canal again. It just isn't appropriate. We don't need to. We have other ways to do things. So that, when it comes to competition, that is something to be thought about. But it's interesting to note that one of the things that was mentioned with regard to the other canals, the Nicaragua Canal, for example, was that they were going to build theirs really, really wide so that the largest ships could also go through their canal. And we can't handle those at the moment. However, the Canal Authority here has always been aware of that fact. They chose the size canal they wanted after talking with shippers and getting a good idea of what was going to be needed and so forth. But they recognize that the day might come in the future when we would have to expand it again to deal with even larger ships. Now, one of the big expenses in time especially, but also in money, is to widen the area that the canal runs through on its way from one side to the other. We go through a mountain range is what it boils down to. And busting that up and pulling it apart and leveling it and getting it all ready so that it can be suitable for a canal is a major part of the recent expansion of the canal. And it was, of course, one of the big problems in the original building of the canal. However, the authority here, not being born yesterday, recognizing the circumstances, regardless, this is before Nicaragua, just the idea that they might someday have to expand again, had all the equipment up there to do this widening effort. And they did it for for another expansion. If it ever needed to be done, the equipment was there. It was just an add-on to a current contract. It cost money, but it's not much in comparison to this gigantic total expansion that was underway. And it will save all sorts of time and money in the future should we need to expand again. And if not, well, that's all right. You know, it's there, and maybe there'll be another purpose for it, another use for it down the road. But the Panama Canal is acutely aware of its situation. It's extremely well run, as I've said, and anybody who's dealt with it knows that. They can take care of themselves, and you needn't worry about them, and I needn't worry about them. And although it's a cornerstone of the development of this country, keep in mind it's gone far beyond that now, too, and it involves so much more than just the canal. We've added on to it. That really is deserving someday of its own little video if anybody's really particularly interested in all those details. But there's a humongous amount of activity going on to increase this our logistics platform here through a major project. We have a plan for 2030. It's being implemented. I mean, it's just really, really impressive how much work has already gone into this and how much is underway currently. And it's working. And it's just very comforting. We now have a sovereign wealth fund. So the canal is now spending off so much money now that there's a level, if it gets to a certain level by legislation, anything beyond that level automatically has to go into this special rainy day fund, if that's what you want to call it, a sovereign wealth fund. And it wasn't ready, it hadn't gotten to that point until last year, recently. And it's now beginning to generate funds going in. The new copper mine that's going to be opening, starting production in June, next month, is going to be adding to that too. It has about $1.3 billion in it. And the first 3 months of this year, they managed to almost grow it 4%, which is not bad for a 3-month period. So they're taking good care of that money, and it's growing as well. So, and it in turn is there for use in times of great need, or for really major projects where we don't want to have to borrow the money, which makes good sense. So everything is working out nicely, and the canal is a very interesting thing. If you come, go and see it. I mean, it's an experience. It's really amazing to watch it. It's right there. It happens right before your very eyes. People find it mesmerizing. Brought guests over and had them stand there for an hour just watching. You know, these ships go up and the ships go down. It's wonderful, but it's also just it's a great thing. It's a great thing, and we're using it as a platform to build into a lot more than that. So it is the canal, but it's much more than the canal too. I wanted just to add that in. So thank you very much for putting up with all this, but I thought it's good to talk about maybe the one thing that everybody thinks they know about when they come down, but often they're missing some of the major points. So thanks for stopping by. If you like subscribing and you haven't already, please click the old subscribe button there. You can always unsubscribe. And ring the little bell beside it, and you'll get immediate notification of future videos. But I'm just happy that you stopped by today, and thank you very much.